cool. Let's go back now. All right, so WordPress news and events. So this changed in fact, it affected our presentation a bit tonight. So the big news, I think the one that probably most people hopefully are aware of at this point is that WordPress 7, which we talked about last month, it was originally targeted for April 9th. So here we are, April 21st. Where's WordPress 7? Well, it's on hold right now. So a decision was made to put the release on hold due to some issues. We talked a little bit of details. I don't know the exact nitty-gritty things, but the general gist of it seems to be that one of the major features in WordPress 7 was this real-time collaboration initiative. And again, this has been something that's been talked about for a while. So I guess the real high level summary is things. Imagine something like Google Docs, where you can have multiple people, accessing a site at the same time, making changes at the same time. Well, that introduces some complexities around caching and locking and things like that. So apparently some issues were discovered really late in the process from some testers and other people around the implementation. So my understanding is it's kind of a major slamming on the brakes of the implementation. In fact, they may be going back and re-architecting, might be too strong of a word, but at least changing how they implemented it. So supposedly tomorrow, April 22nd, is a revised schedule, may be communicated or released. So we'll find out more about that. And one of the other kind of more technical quirks around this too is the fact that apparently to stop things and roll it back to make these changes, they also have to do some stuff from a version control standpoint. So it's basically turning things back from, normally they do release candidates before something gets launched. Well, now it's going back to beta. So that's never been done before with WordPress. So I think that's causing some consternation. So again, there's a blog post I'll put a link to it afterwards. This was from April 2nd about the path going forward. And keep your eyes posted or peeled to WordPress.org, the news portion of that site. Hopefully tomorrow, some more clarity may come out about this. So um,
Yeah,
I don't.
Ray,
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
I dropped a link to my favorite source for WordPress news, which is the repository.mail. And because there's an actual reporter and she gathers this information and tries to really kind of present it. Yeah, the main issues had to do with a couple of things, but the primary issue was with real-time collaboration, which I can spend the next hour and a half talking about whether we need that or not, but I'll just spend a minute or two every once in a while. But causes a server requirement, and a lot of it has to do with to be able to, if two people are working on something has to be in between, kind of pinging back and forth. And the way that was working was it was basically, the easiest way to say it was hanging up. It just wasn't working correctly. So now there's an idea to, well, there's caching issues, and also we'll have this new table that we would that would be used to manage that. And that in itself is a big thing, because that would be changing some uh, deep down core infrastructure of things. So a wise choice was to push it off and all. And it's interesting too, to even the naming of going back to a beta versus release candidate. The last I heard that they were going to go release candidate 3, 4, 5, 6
Yeah.
instead of beta, and the reason being because of the way things work on the GitHub repository, and to go backwards would be a real big problem. Or the other thing, and I thought it was strange, I saw something today where I saw somebody demoing WordPress 7.1, which
Yeah.
was, I'm wondering, did they go to 7.1 to be able to go back to beta, or was that going even further
Yeah.
ahead to?
Yeah, and this is back in my day. I haven't been in corporate software development in a little while, but we
Yeah,
were using just like version control things. You generally have multiple releases going on at the same time, and then at the end, you merge things back together, which is always a nightmare or could be a nightmare. So I think it was, yeah, it's kind of like just the semantics of doing that. It's like, okay, you've already got a branch going off this way, you got another branch, and then what do you do there? So it'll be interesting. Like you said, well, we won't, if we have time at the end or feel interested, we could definitely debate the real-time collaboration thing. But to me, at least again, kind of, and we'll move on in a second, but it doesn't sound like this is gonna be an easy fix. I would not be surprised if this gets pushed out quite a bit, but we'll see. So that's really the big news. That's the only one I really had on here was WordPress 7 on hold. So I don't know, Peter, if you have a tool or plugin spotlight to
Yeah,
share. A
yeah,
little more
I
fun
do.
on that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to show you something. Let me grab
Eagle's got a new picture on Zoom. I just noticed that's very,
Wow.
it's very serious.
That would go up in his presidential library. I like it. Okay, so let me show this. So you can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. This is a new plugin. The reason I even discovered this plugin was because it was submitted as one of the plugins to put onto the featured section. And if you're not sure what that is, it's both in when you're installing um, new when you go to install a plugin, there's now a tab for featured. There's actually a redundant tab for recommended, which right now are the same thing. But the featured tab is a curated list. In fact, if you go back to plugins, you'll see the featured ones are kind of listed up here at the top. These featured plugins are picked. This one I'm showing you now hasn't been selected yet, but I liked it and I wanted to show you why I like it. It's called Build Mode, Maintenance Mode, and Coming Soon page. What's really nice about it, and I very much appreciate it, there's been a number of plugins that have gone the way of simplifying doing things using blocks in a way that makes sense without putting a whole lot of overhead over something. And what this is a tool to put your site in maintenance mode. Say you need to make some changes or whatever, and you want to, the site's going to be down for a little bit. You can put it in maintenance mode, or say you're working on a site and you're not ready to launch it yet, but you've got it on a live server. Maybe you're not working local and you want a coming soon page. You can do all of that with this plugin, and it's really nice because the way it works is instead of over engineering these processes, and there are some out there that I've used over the years that became their own page builders. They totally over engineered what this is. All that the plugin check, I'm sorry, all that the build mode plugin does is it allows you to use a page for maintenance, a page for coming soon. You turn that on, you can edit your site locally, and anyone who's coming to this site that's not logged in as an editor or an admin will see what you put up as the maintenance page, and the pages are just pages, which is really nice. So I'll just show you this real quick. Let me sort this by date. So again, without over engineering, I've got two pages here that I called edit and coming. They're just pages using the editor that you're used to doing. You can make these as fancy as you want. In fact, maybe in a coming soon page, like I played here, I dropped a little form for if you want to subscribe, kind of thing. So to use this plugin, all you have to do is once it's activated, you go into settings, and it's called build mode. And this server is going slow again, so I apologize for that. But the bottom line is you go there. In fact, if you look here, I'll give you a preview. There's in the admin bar, it tells you if build mode is on or off. And right now, actually, even though I'm showing this site, it's actually on. And I've got it set to, the coming soon page. I could set it to the maintenance page. I could set it to any page I want, but create a coming soon page, create a maintenance page, and then when you basically when you enable it, which it's enabled now, as it also tells me up here, build mode is on. Even though if I go and look at the site on the front end here, I can see that if I go to incognito mode, so I'm not logged in, I'm not me. Oops. I will see the coming soon page, because right now I've set the coming soon, or the maintenance one if I have it set. And you can make these, you can use patterns, you can build this out as much as you want. Put your put an explanation of what your coming soon site would be. Photos, images. I could edit the whole page right now. I won't do that, but it is just a page. You could see that it's acting kind of like a landing page, so there's no header or footer. It's just using the content area, but you can build anything you want in there. It's a nice. It fits for me. This idea of like how to best use the block editor and how to apply WordPress in its kind of most simplified way. And I'll show you one other thing. I have the plugin check plugin, which is a WordPress plugin, because this is a new one. And not that you have to do this, but when you if you have this plugin activated, if I go back to my list of plugins, this is just an FYI. If anybody is like, hey, I loaded a plugin, how do I know? It's new. I've been told never load a new plugin. When you have the plugin check plugin, this other plugin loaded, you get in your list of plugins, you can check the plugin. And what this will do is it will run a, you can pick any plugin you want from this list. It'll run a check on that and tell you if there are any issues that it finds with the plugin. And in fact, some plugins that I use with regularity that are well tested actually come up with some errors because of things that have been over the time, like changing a slug name and not matching something in the code. But I promise this will, yeah. So it comes up, check complete, no errors found. And this is actually used by developers before they submit a plugin to the WordPress repository to make sure that it's in good shape. So you can just grab this same plugin, the plugin check, to double check things. So this is a double tip one, but yeah, I like this maintenance mode.
Yeah. I think I've used like Seed Prod or something like that. I think it's the one I've used. Yeah. This one
Exactly.
seems like this one's more native. Seed Prod, from I recall, has like its own built-in free templates you can get that are,
Yeah, Seed Prod that's the one I was saying basically became its own page builder.
yeah.
It totally.
Yeah, it turned into like landing page stuff, I think, in it too, or some other
Yeah,
features.
it's way too much. If you just want to have
Yeah.
a nice, and the ability to create this, and you can install this, like what they call the like a 5-second install or something, whatever it is, where if you install this and you want it to just build you a quick page, you can do it, and then you can go edit it. But it's I like it. I like this approach to things. I can go work on a page, make it be exactly what I want, and then that's my maintenance page, or that's my coming soon page. Yeah.
Cool.
So
Very
it
nice.
is called. I'll put the link in.
Thank you. And speaking
All
of
right.
plugins, Sue has a quick news update about Contact Form 7. Sue, what's going on with Contact Form 7? I don't think I have any sites with Contact Form 7.
Contact Form 7 is ubiquitous. I mean, it's got more than 1 million installs. Of course, if you want to build a good form system, a robust one, you're not going to use it, but it's really good if all you want is a contact form. They're at version 6.2. They just announced there will be no new versions. The only work they may do are some bug fixes if some arise. And in 2028, they're releasing a new forms tool, I suppose. I imagine it won't be completely free, but when 7 comes out, and they decided not to put a form tool into WordPress 7. That was one of the they should have one, but there's going to be a lot of sites that those contact forms are probably not going to load until these guys or people who built it are kind of planning to, whenever they get around to doing a bug fix or an upgrade. They didn't announce this globally. They announced it on their own website. And unless you look at their and if you go to contactform7.com, you don't get to their website. That's not the website they're using. They've got a new name and a new website. And if you're using Contact Form 7, this would be an excellent time for you to look for another solution.
Yeah.
It used to, I think my only experience with Contact Form, I think it was Contact Form 7, was working on a client site where they had purchased a theme from like Theme Forest and it was kind of bundled in with that, like Visual Composer and everything there. So some people may not know, that they have it except for older sites, like you said.
Yeah,
But,
Cadence
yeah.
has a form builder in it. It's not robust. It
Yeah.
doesn't do things that you can do with Gravity Forms. There's a lot of others, but I'm one of those old people who got the lifetime Gravity Forms thing for next to nothing, and I can put it on every site I care to. So I just paid them again because it comes up in March. But if you're using forms, Peter, what's your go-to form tool?
Right now it's Fluent Forms
And
because I got the lifetime deal.
Me too. And
yeah, I
I-
use Gravity Forms because I got the lifetime deal, and it's good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It is. It's obviously it was the gold standard. Fluent Forms, a fantastic plugin form. A plugin for forms is WS Form. The only challenge is what I needed it for was the highest tier pricing, so it was much more of a decision.
Mhm.
So, and then there's another one that I've worked with where the free version has got a ridiculous number of features. It's called Form Gent, Gent. That's the thing. There are so many options. So many options. Gravity Forms was, it was like when you had a website, you had Gravity Forms, advanced custom fields. As
Yeah,
those
there
were
was the stack. That was
yeah,
the stack.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Eagles put something in the chat too for folks. It's a link
Thank you,
to
Eagle. And I
migrate
love
from
your
Contact Form
picture.
7 to Fluent Form. It's one click.
There you go.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sue, for bringing that to our attention. So, I'll tell you what, let's keep moving along because again, we're part 2 of this topic, and I don't want a part 3
Yeah.
as much as it's interesting. Let's see how much we can get through tonight. So,
There's
again,
also there's also a Gravity Forms importer for Contact 7.
okay, cool.
Excellent. Okay.
All right, so let me share again. So just a reminder, real quick recap from where we left off last month. So last month, fortunately, Peter had the sanity to say, "Hey, let's stop and let's make this part 2 into 2 parts." Because like, yeah, this list is getting big. But we covered, so the topic today is a continuation of launching your WordPress website. So again, you can go back to the last month's YouTube recording, or if you want to just download this checklist from the HartfordWP.com, you can do that and watch along with what we're doing. So really what we talked about last month are all the preparatory steps of, considerations before you launch, things to do before you formally launch a site. But some of those, just to recap a little bit, because they are going to play their part in determining the launch steps. There are a couple. Again, this isn't the complete variations of kind of configurations you can have, but it really does make a difference between, where your website, if you're launching a completely new site versus replacing an existing site. So if something's completely new, smooth sailing generally. Things are good. It's more of those tricky things of if you're replacing a site, and then are you replacing a site in terms of using the same hosting and just overlaying for just kind of dumbly overlaying that old site, or are you using new hosting and the domain is separate? So there's a couple of variations that we talked about last time, but so those are going to they're going to play their part a little bit in what we talk about from a launch standpoint. So again, what we covered last month was the planning part of it, pre-launch cleanup, and this is kind of where we stopped. We finished at pre-launch cleanup. I think we showed, or maybe I showed, like one tool like Screaming Frog, for example. This was the case of replacing an existing site. So running that crawl against the site to get a plan, a redirection plan, which then you can use to implement. So when you launch the site, you don't have a bunch of broken links. So that's where we ended last time. That's the quick recap. Okay, so now you're ready to launch. So what does that mean? Again, it kind of depends on the launch situation. So the way we'll do this, again, Peter and I don't we don't practice these things much, if at all. So I'll talk a bit, shut up, jump in with comments, Peter, and then others too. I mean, again, we're not covering every scenario, but I'd like to hear any variations or things we might have missed. So, again, if you're over, I guess this applies even if you're brand new. You always want to have a backup of your site in case things go wrong. But especially if you're replacing a site, and there's plenty of backup tools out there. Folks in the chat maybe put your favorites. The one I've tended to use the most, just from having the most experience with, is all-in-one WP migration. Again, there's a free version of it on WordPress.org under plugins, so all-in-one WP migration. What I like about this one is it's pretty dummy-proof most of the time. So this was like I think one of the first ones I had used. So the way it works, and again, I think a lot of these other plugins work similarly for a backup, is I got this site here with it. I'm not going to run it, but once you install the plugin, there's really two steps. The export is doing the backup. So the nice thing about WP migration is, you can just stick with the very, very basic things to say, I'm just going to export the full site. That's everything, the media folder, that's the plugins, that's the themes, et cetera, all the content. And you can just export it into a big zip file. You also have additional advanced options to say, hey, as long as I'm exporting, be a little bit smarter, exclude the spam comments, post revisions, so give me a cleaner, smaller version. Maybe your media library is huge and you're like, well, I can do that myself because I'm familiar with FTP or other ways to transfer that. So, because one of the caveats is with the free version, I believe it's still true. I actually haven't used it in a little while, is I think there's a file size limit, 256 megabytes, I believe, at least on the import. Export, you can export. I've exported multi-gigabyte sites. On the import,
It's 512.
Is it 512? Oh, maybe it's my hosting that's on here. Yeah. So the hosting can also play a restriction to this too. So, and again, what I like about this in general is it is fairly simple. So you download it, you upload it. I have my caveats to this. Other folks have used all-in-one WP migration. Is I have had issues in the past uploading or restoring large sites. We're talking like 5 gig or larger. That usually was the host that I was importing it to would time out. So, the way it's doing it when I did it locally, you do the import, there's obviously a lot of network traffic going on. That's the only time I've really had issues with this in the past. Otherwise, it's been pretty rock solid for me for doing a backup and restore in one tool. Peter, how about yourself? I know you probably use something different. I think you've mentioned it before for.
Yeah. For backing up, because I had the lifetime license, although it has changed because of, and Sue will understand what's happened with the whole Liquid Web thing, but was Backup Buddy. I've used WP Vivid, but when I'm moving a site, including moving it to say my local machine and all, I find that the Migrate Guru plugin is great, and it can handle pretty much any size, which is what's really nice. So that's an example of, when you're launching a site that maybe you ran locally, and how are you getting it up on the server? So I found that a plugin called Migrate Guru, where you basically set things up on either side and then it connects and just sends everything up for you, it has been one of the most successful ways of moving sites. But yeah, I still have Backup Buddy because I've always had Backup Buddy, which is, yeah.
And you're right. One thing I did mention in here too is if you're moving, depending on the hosting you're moving to, some hosting also will provide a plugin to do that. I think SiteGround now has that as well. I know,
yeah,
was it Managed WP? One of the other ones, or WP Engine, one of those has something too, where basically, because you're signing up as a new customer, they're like, hey, we'll give you this plugin. So you install it on the old site, it'll do the migration for you. So it takes care of a lot of the steps. So one nice thing, we'll talk about these manual steps a little bit later, just so people know it. But one nice thing that some of these plugins do for you is they'll do some of these manual steps, like updating the URLs, which we'll talk about in a second. So,
yeah, you're right. There are a lot of hosts that will handle that. I started way back when with Flywheel, and now they're part of WP Engine, and that was one of the attractions. You just basically said, here's the site, wherever the coding, and they moved it over and everything just worked because they had somebody kind of manage it on their side. It was automated, but at the same time, you had a person who was looking at it. So,
well, and that's, yeah, I'm going to say the person thing too. For people who aren't comfortable with this, if you're a newbie or whatever, or you're telling a client, let's say you're parting ways with a client and somebody's moving on, and you don't want to be the tech support, that could be a good reason to send somebody to that type of hosting arrangement to say, hey, you have any problems, they'll help you out. The other backup, just to mention quickly too, is again, if your server or hosting does include backup, which I hope most modern hosting do, although I did encounter one recently that did not. So that's why this is fresh in my mind. You want to do in a replacement situation, you want to do a backup of the old site, so you can quickly do restore that way without having to worry about a plugin. If things really get messed up. So this is a situation of, well, I guess if anything's new or you're replacing, if you have temporary URLs. So for example, let's say you're working locally or on a staging site, so you've built a new website, you're ready to launch it. You want to make sure that you get rid of any temporary URLs on your site. So again, if it was like local, it could be local dot, whatever the real website name is, or stage dot, whatever, that kind of thing. So there's a few ways to do that. Sometimes the plugin, as I said, all-in-one WP migration will do that for you as it's doing a restore. It's smart enough to do a search and replace. But if something got missed, which it quite often happens, and in fact, where I found that happened to me the most often was with sites built using page builders. They always seem to have a little a little quirk, a little something going on where I'd have to go hunt something down or a link that was broken, et cetera, that kind of thing. So my go-to for this, and this is after you've launched the site, although you can do this before, I guess that it doesn't really matter that much, is the Better Search and Replace plugin, which I think I also have on here as well. So Better Search and Replace. There's other ones out there too. This is again just the one that I've most familiar with. There's a free version of it. A lot of installs, like 1 million installs. So when you run this thing, sorry, here's my site. It installs it under Tools, I believe. Yeah, under Tools, Better Search Replace. This is where it gets a little bit confusing if you've never used this one before. So let's say I'm not going to run on this site because I don't want to break the site. But let's say this is my old site name and I want to change it to my new site name. So that's the term I'm looking for. So you want to be really careful of just changing what needs to be changed. You don't need to go overboard. So if both of these are .coms, whatever, you don't need to put .com in both. Just change like the minimal piece that needs to change. But here's where things get a little bit confusing. I've found is that most WordPress sites, you don't just have the metadata, or like the post data. You really may need to search multiple tables or select all tables. So in this case, these are for other plugins and things like that. So what you can do is just select everything in here. So make sure what you want to have replaced is selected. The nice thing with this plugin as well is it lets you do a dry run. So you run it once, it tells you, yep, I found some changes. The free version doesn't tell you exactly.
yeah.
It doesn't give you all the details. The paid version does, but it works well. I trust that it's actually found things. So when you're ready to do the actual change, you want to uncheck the run as dry run and then run search and replace. So that will update. That'll update the majority of things in tables. There may still be times where there's little things outside of that may still cause some issues, but is that, Peter? I don't know if that's the one you go for as well too.
It is, yeah. It's the one that dry run is super important. This is one where you absolutely do a backup of your database. With a lot of the backup tools, you can select if you're doing the whole site or just the database. This is touching the database, so you back up your database before making the change. Run the dry run, see what makes sense. You can even be selective on the tables if you want to tiptoe through, but you have to keep track of which table. Most of your information, as Ray said, is in a couple of the post table and the post meta table. But you're literally touching the content behind everything. So it is finding every instance where it's one you're changing to another. Fantastic that it does it, but also be careful. So.
Yeah. And I'm trying to I can't think off the top of my head of examples where I've had where I've run this and I've still found one or two kind of stragglers through
Well,
testing.
where I found the problem is, and I'm not sure if we're addressing it in the future, but we'll address it now, which is things like you may have images that you're
PDF, yeah,
pulling from, yeah, with a different URL,
right.
for example, and or or file. Here's another thing that sometimes gets missed when you inherit a site is make sure you know if they have built their own file directory or something like
Yes.
that. Because all of a sudden you move it and you go, wait a minute, where did all of my documents
Yes.
go? Well, we didn't
Yes.
migrate that over because it's not part of the WordPress,
Yes.
hierarchy. But yeah, being I lost my train of thought on what
Yeah,
I
I
first
think
said.
it's me. I think for me,
Oh,
it's
the
generally the
picture.
media stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, so anyway, so kind of again, the purpose of this is you're building a site new. You probably use some sort of temporary domain. You probably hopefully did not build it directly on the live site at the same time. So you need to make some changes. So that's the plugin, find and replace, or I'm sorry, better search and replace is one that will do it. There are some hosting tools that will also do this too. So on SiteGround, I'll talk about it a little bit later. When you change when you change the domain through your hosting, so for example, I built a site recently on SiteGround using just a temporary domain, and then I changed it because they wanted to keep. I'm still going to maintain their hosting. So when I changed the from the SiteGround site admin tool that they had, when I changed it from a temporary domain to the primary domain, they had a tool behind the scenes that was basically doing a search and replace for me. So that's something to consider as well too. That if you're, let's say you're using a temporary domain at one point on hosting just to show your clients, what you're working on. When you switch it to the primary domain, that may also do kind of a cleanup of temporary URLs.
Exactly. Yeah, Eagle makes a good point too of making sure that everything is going to an HTTPS URL. You just want to make sure that you're getting that's your opportunity to get every URL correct. And yeah, if you're obviously we want to have our SSL certificates active and a secure encrypted website. And if you have mixed, you'll get errors on that. So that's definitely something you want to do. And then yeah, so tools like a Migrate Guru will do this search and replace on the fly. So that's, and again, you may not have to go through a search and replace, better search and replace, if you're using a tool or a service where they do that for you.
And this is just a quick example. It's going to vary depending on your hosting, but within SiteGround, yeah, they have this thing of like if you're using this, they'll give you like some gibberish domain to use for testing when you first build something, and then you can switch it over to change primary domain. Go ahead, Eagle.
The other place is that if you're using a page builder, some page builders, it, when you migrate through the migrate tools all in one, SiteGround, whatever those are, sometimes they will miss URLs that are
Yeah,
buried in the page builder caches and stuff.
yeah,
Elementor is really famous for this. And so
yeah.
that's why I always run the better search and replace after every migration just to check that I got everything and also to check that all my HTTPS, all my URLs are HTTPS. Because
Yeah, I got burned on. I think it was an Elementor site where it was like there was an element in their module that was like a gallery module, and that was one thing. I moved it over, and somehow for whatever reason, I did the replace and the gallery the URLs for all the images didn't get touched for some reason. So it's little things like that. So that's testing is still important. So these are like as much as you can do to try to fix things ahead of time. But yes, testing. We'll talk about that in a second too.
And I think that's a great point. Even using like a migrate tool as part of that habit of going in, then doing a better search and replace, doing that dry run and see, are there any issues that were missed? Absolutely. Thanks.
And speaking of galleries, you also need to be aware that not all galleries use media files. They have their own, like XGen or some of these other. They create their own gallery, their own directory structure, and so sometimes that could get missed in a migration.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the next big thing that sometimes is scary, especially for new people. It's domains and DNS settings. So again, this really, if you're doing a brand new site, everything's brand new, don't worry about this. In general, things are nice, everything's set up for you. But if there's a couple of scenarios here. One is if you're replacing a website, so let's say you're replacing an old website and you're moving hosting to a new hosting. So this was again that situation I talked about, I did recently. So they used to be on, I don't know, this ancient hosting that just was terrible. It didn't offer backup. They had to pay for everything, pay for the SSL. It was terrible. So we're moving them over to my hosting. So in that case, I was replacing the site and I was moving the hosting. There are a couple of things that, at least just in my opinion, are kind of best practices. So first you want to look at the DNS settings on the old site, really just to kind of get an idea of what's there. So sometimes there's some surprises hiding out there, like MX records, which are for mail, TXT records for like site verification, things like that. So are there or any other custom settings? Sometimes that's a place to discover things about a website that you're like, oh, nobody told me about that, or you're like, hey, are we still using this? Like, Outlook MX things, like nobody said you're using Outlook for your emails, that kind of stuff. So just to be paranoid and safe before you change anything, take screenshots of all those settings. Could be quite a bit. I think I have this is an example from WP Beginner. Yeah, because I think, oops, we'll just look at this too, because I don't want to show my DNS stuff. So again, if you're not familiar with where you find it, in general, it's under Zone Editor, DNS tools. Some places may call it slightly different things. Sometimes a little bit hard to find, in fact. So anyway, you want to at least check those settings. And then here's where you're going to come in this scenario of, replacing a site and moving hosting. There's a couple of ways to do that. One is probably the easiest way, and sometimes the hosting provider that you're moving to will recommend this, but just so it may or may not work for you. That's just changing the name servers. So in the DNS settings, one of the things you'll see is it's like NS, or generally it's called like NS or name servers. There we go. It's like in this case, Bluehost was the name servers, et cetera, et cetera. So let's say you're going from Bluehost to SiteGround. Well, SiteGround will tell you, here's our name servers. So whatever, SiteGround 1, SiteGround 2, or whatever they are. And all you would do is, in the previous DNS settings, you would change the name server. So that's just one simple thing to switch. When would you do that? That's when you're switching hosting, but you're keeping the domain. But there's big ramifications to that. So it really transfers a full control to the new hosting provider. So everything will now look at your new hosting servers. It is the simplest. In a lot of cases, it's probably what you want to do eventually, because there's reasons for keeping the other things. But that one, like I said, is fairly straightforward. In fact, most of the times when you search, like, if you're migrating the site, that's what they'll tell you to do, is just change the name servers. Slightly more complicated, and then I'll show up for a second, is what if you want to switch the hosting, the website hosting, but you want to keep other things still pointing to, you want to point the website to a new hosting, but there's things on the old hosting that you still want to keep in place. For example, probably the most common one is email. So let's say that they have, mailboxes or other things on their old hosting, and for various reasons, you want to keep those in place. Well, in that case, you want to leave alone some of these other records, like the MX record, et cetera, but you want to just have all web traffic, kind of transfer over and point to your new hosting. Well, there's a couple ways you can do that. Probably the simplest one is changing this A record. And what does the A record look like? I think it's down here. That's like the address record, A record. So you really need to know the IP address of the server that you're pointing to. So, you've created a new website on SiteGround, for example. In SiteGround, if you go to one of the admin tools there, I don't think it's on this example, it'll tell you, oh, here's your new site, your website settings. In there, it'll give you the IP. They'll often discourage you doing this method because, in most cases, if you're using shared hosting, you're not necessarily 100% guaranteed that the IP address is going to be fixed. They may need to move it for various reasons, and that could break things. So, use this one with caution, but I've done this quite a bit for various reasons. So it's a little bit, again, you've got to go in there, make a DNS change. You need the IP address. So in this case, it transfers only the website, keeps everything else on the old hosting. And again, it just changes the IP address only. I'll shut up there for a second. Any comments on these?
Yeah, I mean, first I want to make sure that everybody, so when we say DNS, that stands for domain name system. It's the address book for the web. So you have the domain that you have registered, and you basically say, my website is at this address and my email is managed on that address and so on. And your web hosting company will have a lot of this for you. There's a lot of really good tools out there. And where you put that name server, there are people who swear by the Cloudflare service to be able to kind of keep that separate from everything. There's a lot of good reasons why you want to manage these things in different places. It's so easy to have a web host that's also doing your email, that you're putting your name server and all, but you're literally putting your eggs in one basket. If there's some issue they have, you're down. So being able to manage that using another tool is super valuable. There's also, when I'm working on these things, there is, and I know probably years ago I posted this, and there are other services here. I will put the link in, but I use viewdns.info as my tool when I'm moving a site or looking at. I can get those IP records pretty easily. There's a way of looking up. There's a lot of options where you can, show me all the records, show me the status, show me the history of the IP address. I see sometimes people lose their domain, and then you look in the history and go, yeah, this is where yours expired and somebody else bought it from you. But one of the neat things that I also do is when I do a migration, or I'm changing from one server to another, looking at one of the options on this view DNS is the DNS propagation checker. And you can literally.
I'll show that in a minute.
You got that?
We'll talk about that one. Yeah.
Okay,
so that's perfect. The after point. But yeah, just
yeah.
I mean, the other just real quick one too, in terms of, because this does get a bit confusing. Like I'll admit, like when I first started doing this, this was the one I was most nervous about breaking things. you really can break things.
You really, I was gonna say, and you sure can.
There's many ways you can break a site. This is one way you can really break a site. And so CNAME gets a little confusing too, because CNAME is that canonical name. So again, in theory, you don't want to be hard coding IP addresses to things. So a lot of times, you'll see advice saying, "Oh, use a CNAME, don't use an A record, et cetera, et cetera." But I've seen so many different DNS setups on different hosting where there's no consistency. It all depends on the hosting company, the person who created it, et cetera, et cetera. So just be prepared that things may get a little bit confusing. Like I had one where, what was it? It was the CNAME was pointing to something else, and then the A record was pointing to something different. It was kind of a bit of a jumbled mess. So, but these are probably the ones you want to be most familiar with. A record, think about that as really pointing to a server or an IP address. CNAME is just sort of a canonical name pointing to something else in this list. MX records are the mail exchange records. And then TXT is kind of for a lot of different things. You can see that for, Google Search Console, et cetera, et cetera. Just kind of a verification record. So again, this is all about if you're switching hosting. Name servers, if you can just do that alone, things are much, much easier for you. Again, or if you're doing a brand new site, you don't have to worry about most of this stuff. Some other kind of gotchas, Peter already mentioned one of them too, is caching. So just be aware of it if you have, or maybe you didn't know that the site you were working on had, hopefully you should know, it was set up with something like Cloudflare, kind of Cloudflare is a CDN, something in between your site and your domain. So that can throw a whole other wrinkle in it. That could be another place you have to go to and change something. Caching, we'll talk a little bit about later too during testing, but just be aware of that. Not only is there a browser caching, but some hosting, was it WP Engine's one I can think of, I work with kind of frequently. There's, they may have at the account level or the hosting level caching set there too. So you may be thinking, why I don't see my changes, what's going on? Generally, that's, could be a caching type issue.
one thing that I run into, and you're on Mac, I'm on Windows, is going into the command prompt
Mhm.
and typing the old DOS one, ipconfig / flush DNS, and this is you're basically saying, for try to forget where you think everything is, and go get the new stuff. Because one thing we didn't say, and we should probably do a whole meetup on this topic of DNS and things like that, because it is daunting. But this idea, if your machine still thinks something is in a place, you have to go get this from a DNS server. And the thing in terms of the propagation, which you'll touch, is that that information starts in one place, but it gets
Mm.
propagated throughout the entire web. So it is
I've
a pretty
and
cool
I've
thing.
I've had unique problems. I've had my own unique problems with DNS issues where at one point I was running on my router some VPN stuff, at the router level. So that would always be like, oh, I need to wait a minute. I'd have to either turn off the VPN or
Yeah.
turn on the VPN, because that would throw another complete wrinkle. Like the rest of the world would see the propagation, but I wouldn't see it yet because I was pointing to something a little bit freaky. So
On a PC, you have a host file that you can go and change, and that
yeah.
overrides everything. So that's an interesting thing that sometimes I've had to use when stuff just wasn't working in the world. And
Right.
so
So a lot of this, and again, it might be throwing a lot of info at people who haven't done this before, but it's more of go back to this checklist, because when things break or things don't work, I think these days you can probably find this information more readily through Chat GPT and stuff like that. But
yeah,
back in the day, it was hard to figure out what was broken unless you talked to somebody else who knew what they were doing. Like DNS propagation is a funny one too. Peter mentioned this already. So let's say you've made your changes finally, you've changed the A record or name servers, et cetera, et cetera. You know, it may take, depending on your hosting, this may take a while. They sometimes say, and depending on what record gets changed, it may take a while. So, for example, I know on more popular hosting, even some of the ones that people kind of sneer at, like GoDaddy, that one generally pushes out very quickly. Like, name servers, if I change a record, whatever, that seems to get propagated very quickly. On your weirder mom and pop hosting, I've had some of these take hours, 6 to 8 hours to get it completely propagated. And that, just kind of frustrating. So, be patient. Again, it really depends on the hosting, but your friend, I know there's other ones out there, but this is the one that I use as well. I think you said you do as well, Peter, is DNS checker. So, for example, is it okay if I use Hartford WP?
yeah, absolutely.
And well, we won't look at the A record. We can look at,
Look at it. Look at whatever you want.
all right, we'll look at the name server. Let's see where you're hosting it. So in this case, that was super. Oh, it's Hover. There we go. That's another little, at least the name servers on hover.com. So let's say we changed the name server from hover.com to SiteGround, for example. What you'll typically see in the middle of a migration is you'll see a couple of these maybe are checked, and there's a bunch of X's or things that you don't expect. So let's say half of them have gone to the new one, the other half have not. And all you can do is sit here and click that button and just
Yeah,
click and click. Wait and wait until maybe you don't care about St. Petersburg, Russia, and Yandex, but maybe the other ones you do want to, because if you're talking to somebody and they're like, I don't see the new site yet, this could be the thing. It just hasn't propagated yet. So this is a great tool, for other changes too. Like I said, usually name servers, I found that A records seem to go pretty quickly. It's the TXT files for some reason. Like if you need to do a Google site verification and you add some, a TXT record, for some reason those always just seem to take a long time to get propagated. I don't know,
yeah,
maybe it's a lower priority on them. There's an option, like Peter said, it's probably worth its own discussion about with the TTL, the time to live too. So
yeah.
you can change that so the record gets flushed quicker, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of little quirks to this, but tools like this, and again, this will be in our checklist. DNS checker is your friend. Other quick things too, again, so we're still talking about the process of you've launched, now you're kind of waiting for things to settle. Other things just to be aware of is SSL certificates.
Yeah.
So for example, if you're using a temporary URL like I was in this example, so we again switched hosting from somebody else's hosting over to my hosting. I was originally using a temporary URL. once I launched the site and changed it to the real URL, I had to reinstall an SSL certificate because it won't let you install it, using the real domain until your DNS settings have propagated. So
Right.
make sure you install and verify any SSL certificates. This one's more kind of almost a post-launch, but I just want to put it here. I don't know if it belongs here or post-launch, so you don't forget it. Licenses for
Mm.
product, plugins, themes, things like that. Sometimes, again, if you're doing this from scratch, it's like, oh, wait a minute, you're not licensed on here. Or just make sure that things are all updated correctly, especially if you're kind of running almost dual for a little period of time. Because you don't need to delete. Again, in my example, there was an old website, an HTML website that I was replacing with a WordPress site. I didn't want to delete the old HTML site in case things went bad and I could flip a switch and make it go live. So I wasn't like completely using all the proper domain names in my plugins. So what I mean by that is some plugins, when you get a license key, I'm thinking like Fluent Forms, for example, and a couple others too. But like Fluent Forms, every time you use a license key on the Fluent Forms site under my account, I can see the websites that are authorized for it. I happen to have unlimited, so maybe that's a bad example. But there's ones where I have one license key, and it'll tell you, oh, you're using that already. So, again, just make sure that you switch things properly. Um, and then kind of post launches, there's probably a lot of stuff covered under here, but they may
Yeah.
bleed into what we said of launching. So,
Yeah. Right,
go ahead.
just
Mhm.
because I didn't want to forget
Yeah.
something, and I know we talked a little bit, I believe, about SEO in the last time, but have we talked about managing the redirects, or are we going to do that going forward? I don't know
I think I covered it in the but let me go back to real quick to see if we said it. So we said on the prep thing, yeah, create the redirects, import the redirect rules, uncheck discourage search engines from indexing. So again, your site's gonna be live. And then it was, I guess, I don't know if I said it in here direct, import the rules. So I think I say in the post launch of verifying like 404s in here.
Yeah, and then you do it
Oh,
before,
and
during, and
ongoing.
after.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just want to make sure that, especially anything that you've got indexed on Google, that it goes somewhere versus,
Yes.
if you've
Yeah.
changed the hierarchy of a site. And I just didn't want to forget
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yep. No, that's a good call, Peter. Yep, it's in here too.
Good.
We'll jump to that because again, these
Good.
aren't in like a waterfall order. So definitely that's a key one. Any SEO related stuff. So
Yeah.
for example, if you've really moved, this one's, I don't want to say I'm an expert in this. I know some people say don't do this. In terms of setting up a new Google Analytics ID, because a lot of times you want to carry the history over. There could be times though where again some of the analytics and things were not set up properly. I'm thinking of this recent project I did where I I don't think it was ever tracking anything properly, just the way they had the script set up on the pages. So just to start things off fresh, and I didn't have access to the old analytics account, et cetera, et cetera. I really set up a new one and said, okay, we're not going to lose any of the history of the site, obviously, but just having a new GA4 code and all that. So again, I connected it to the WordPress site, verified it worked. Again, just at least verify the analytics are working on your new site. And sitemaps, that's a big thing too. So Google Search Console, especially the one I did was a major restructuring of the site. So that's where all those like redirections were really critical. The whole layout of this HTML site was completely different than WordPress.
Yep.
So I needed to resubmit, brand new sitemaps to say where everything is, and kind of the old ones sort of faded off over time.
Yeah.
So back to just again testing. So this is gonna be a big component of how you spend your time after launching. You want to do some basic sanity check. Look and feel testing. Do things look normal? I'd probably say a couple browsers too. Hopefully you've done all your pre-testing beforehand. Again, don't make sure you're not logged in as an admin necessarily, because a lot of times a WordPress admin, certain things won't be cached. So again, you want to do it as a real user. Mobile as well too. You think you may have tested things properly, test it out with mobile, and really it's going through, like I said, a critical path testing. Do the essential functions work, like contact forms, send some test emails. Again, warn people you're doing that. Make sure you don't have like 1,000 people notified on emails. Just maybe one or two. Any e-commerce stuff, you can do connections to PayPal, things like that. So just really all the core things before you find out now during testing as opposed to a week or two down the road.
One of the best things you could do with the testing is have other people, if you can, even friends and family, go try the site out, because they're asking them to do it on their own systems, their phones, whatever, because then they won't have anything cached. They will be like other new users. They won't. You might end up missing something just because you've become so used to it, or something's cached, or you just and they click on something and go, hey, this whole link just went nowhere, or whatever. So one of the best things you can do is just have somebody who doesn't know anything about the site use these different tools. But yeah, you can really run the risk of saying it looks great to me and realize it because you've been looking at it through a very kind of predefined lens versus what a new user. So yeah, definitely use incognito. Definitely use a different browser if you can. Use your phone, but if you get somebody else to do it, that's really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's again, these are the ones like that you'll see now. Meanwhile, lurking behind the scenes, maybe the ones that you don't see, which sometimes can be worse. So
yeah,
there's a couple, and I think we did a meetup once about error. I think we did. We should have. We did some error monitoring and all that and troubleshooting. I think we did. So that it's probably covered in that, but really some of the basics, when I say browser console. So for example, if we go to a site, who do I still have my site up? Let me bring my site up. Is it just the demo site? The demo to. So let's say I go to this site has so much junk in it, but let's say you look at everything looks great, wonderful, wonderful, but if you right click again, hopefully everyone knows how to do this at least. Go to inspect, and then underneath the console here, this is where you could see potentially some errors on here. So for example, the one that I would say shows up pretty easily here are like the HTTP versus HTTPS. That'll generally show up here. There's other ways to find that, but that could be one where you look at something and say, oh, another one that shows up on the console here are things like not just even broken links. Yeah, I mean broken links, but in particular, let's say, if it can't find like an image, so maybe there's an image you're working on locally on your computer, you upload it again, and you upload it to the hosting. It can't find a logo, a favicon. That one's burned me a couple of times. Those little things. You look here in the console and say, "Oops, something's missing." So this is where you'd see some error messages. What can be confusing about the console though is you almost want to do this before you do it. It's one of those things like sometimes when you look for errors, you find things that may or may not be an error. So what I mean by that, for example, is I wonder if this site might not have it. Is there anything weird on this site? Oh, here we go. Error with permissions policy header. Oh my God! What? Oh no! Would I panic about this? No, because this is probably I'm using the Brave browser, so I have some things like it's doing some privacy shields and stuff like that. So don't freak out sometimes, but if you see oddball behavior, this is probably one of the first places you want to go to is in the console to look for errors there. The other ones, though, these are more the tricky ones, is PHP errors, the PHP error log. There's a couple of ways you can view this. Some hosting allows you to look at the PHP error log from the server. There's also at least this one WordPress plugin that I've used a couple times, the Error Log Monitor plugin. Yeah, so you install this and it'll show you any PHP level errors. So things you would see here, I'm trying to think of ones I've found. For me, the most common ones recently are my site is running, my WordPress site is running on a hosting platform that has an older or incompatible PHP version. That's where I tend to find a lot of PHP errors. So for example, maybe it generally doesn't happen with a new site I'm building, but let's say I'm for whatever reason the hosting is like PHP version 7 or something, and I'm running a later version of WordPress or a plugin, and something breaks because some PHP function is deprecated. those are the tricky ones. Like, so that you'll only find in like a PHP error log. You wouldn't see that in the console necessarily. So anyways, this is one way to view that.
You can find some interesting things. It could be plugin related. We hadn't really talked about it, but I've worked on sites where they were long in the tooth, so that there was custom code built into something. Some developer had put some stuff in that had since been has completely changed and actually wasn't needed anymore because of everything that we have now to build websites in 2026. Ray, I'm going to put a suggestion in for us.
Mhm.
I think and this has been on my mind and it just came up, and so I'm reminded. I think we need to do a meetup on the browser inspector and all of the tools that are in there. Like you're touching on console and things.
Yeah.
There's so much power in there.
I did one a long time ago, but it's worth going back to now.
Oh, I think so. And we've got a lot
Yeah.
of folks, and I want to learn because there's you go into the network settings, reload your site, see what things are loading, how long does it take,
setting breakpoints and
there's so accessibility and all your analytics and stuff, but it's broken.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one to do.
Incredibly strong tool. Yeah.
And it's a funny one that sometimes I take it for granted that I'm like, oh yeah, most people know how to do these things, but there's a lot of stuff even there I don't necessarily know how to do. So that's
I'll correct you on that. Most people don't know how to do that, I know what I know, and I'm only scratching the surface, but that's really handy. But there's so much. What console is doing you're in the browser, and it is basically the thing that's telling you everything that's actually happening.
Right.
So when you're looking at your browser window, you're seeing what the browser is taking and rendering, right? Putting all together and showing you something. All of the workings about what's the code, what's connecting, how many times did it talk back to the server? There's a great thing. We go, wait a minute, how many times did it have to request pieces of information? It's really, really incredible.
And I use it quite often, but yeah, even me, I think there's things in here too that'd be nice to go back, especially with some of the added stuff in there. So yeah, definitely.
Well, even what you're showing the mobile version, right?
Right. Because I was playing around with it. Yeah. Right. If it's responsive, exactly.
Yep.
So just another error one too, one that's a little bit funkier to set is if you want to just log WordPress errors, you can change that in the WordPress.config. There's also, I couldn't find one, or maybe I forgot to put it in here. There are ways to turn that on through plugins as well too. So if you want to turn debug on in WordPress. So those may be errors that are WordPress specific, but don't cause a PHP error. So that's why if you think about these things, like, if somebody's new and saying, well, why am I looking at all these places? Won't they all show up in the same? No, they won't. Browser or the browser console generally are things that are like, in the HTML or again, can't find resources. Those are the client side things. The PHP is all the way server side, as close to the database as you can get. And then WordPress is like an application running in PHP. So they're all different types of errors that don't necessarily, you may not see the same thing in all three. So again, this is something that when you launch a new site, I'm not saying do this every day, but just take a peek. Ideally, you go look at the PHP error log and one doesn't exist, and you say, "Oh, wonderful," or there's no WordPress errors, wonderful, and then just move on with your life. Other kind of things, again, these are just some quirky things that I found, again, you can't really do until the site is alive. So like for me, like actually setting up the reCAPTCHA and connecting it to Google. There's like, I can't think of any other like little things like that too, where, can you do it ahead of time? Some you can, but some of them, because you need that site verification, TXT, those kind of things. So I tend to have my own checklist and I knock those off as I'm doing like post-launch testing. I think I had one or two examples more, but reCAPTCHA was one that kind of sprang to mind for me. So that's
it went into my brain and went out. Oh, your email delivery. Another one to check, because if you're moving things around, first of all, make sure that if you do start working on the DNS, that you didn't mess up email in the first place. But if say you're now on a new host, that sending email from a WordPress site you
SMTP,
relying on the server to do it without anything else, you just can't do anymore. You need to use like an SMTP
you're right. I didn't put that in here.
delivery plugin. Do we have that? No,
I
we'll
think I
have
put
to.
it in here. Maybe it was in. It should be in there. If it wasn't,
Yeah.
yes. So that's so making sure that things don't end up in the spam folder and that
Well,
any contact form.
making sure it generates in the first place. So,
Right,
for
right.
example, if you have if something crashes on your site and the admin gets emailed something but that email system doesn't work, you don't get the message with the link. That's pretty important. So check that right away. Make sure that you can send yourself an email.
Right. I think, yeah, it's kind of in this critical path testing, but you're right. If things fail, it could be maybe you need to set up SMTP properly and, you know, to
So
validate.
there are some really good SMTP. The Fluent Forum company is
Mhm.
Fluent SMTP is a good example. And what that basically again means is telling your website when you send mail, send it through this system, which isn't the WordPress. You can have a WordPress site that actually can send mail. I find it being rarer at this point. You usually have to send it through something at this point, and your host will often have a service that you want to make sure to use, or you might need SendMail or Mailgun or some other service that makes sure that email can be sent and will be delivered, because then deliverability is a thing. But I definitely have found an issue with that, where all of a sudden it's like I'm not getting any admin notices from the website, and there's some problems, and I didn't have that handy link to reopen the site in like safe mode. I had to go through the host and through the back end.
Yeah.
Not as fun. So.
And then just kind of wrap up stuff, which sometimes is, may never end, but ongoing support, and this could be, a week down the road or two, or I think we talked about this earlier, just at least having what's the expectations for you in terms of a warranty period for this. So for example, if you built the site yourself, guess what? Your warranty is forever. You're always gonna be maintaining this. But if it's a client site, hopefully, I think we talked about in the very beginning, that has to be clearly spelled out. It's like a joke about, you can't expect someone to like get an oil change and then like, 3 months later, you're still calling the mechanic back saying, can you get top off my oil? Like, no, it's, you have to pay for things. So, that needs to be clearly stated, like who's going to maintain the site going forward, a maintenance agreement, plugin updates, just everything, content updates, et cetera, et cetera. So having an idea, if you're handing off a site, does the client know what that means? Quite often they don't. That could be the time to sell your maintenance package or maintenance services to people. Backup, security, making sure all that kind of stuff is set up for ongoing support. And that's site handover. This is probably its own full-blown topic or close to a topic at some point, because there's a lot of discussions on this in terms of, like I said, if you're doing this for a business versus doing this for a friend, doing this for a nonprofit, doing this for yourself, what are the expectations of handover? Do you ever actually hand it over? Or what do you hand over? How do you pass things like license keys over to clients if you're using your own unlimited, lifetime licenses? Again, I think that's probably almost its own separate topic in itself. But don't forget about those kind of things. Again, or my favorite one recently are like Google Maps used to be free. Well, now Google Maps API, if you want to use it through Cloud Console, you need a credit card. Whose credit card will be on there? Not mine, if it's not my site, so.
Right.
Any other, just again, I know this was like a lot of stuff we covered for launching, and not to scare people, but it does make me think, again, listen to some of the hype and scare around AI and things like that. You can build this, anyone can build a site. Building a site is just one step. But it's this stuff that really can be intimidating. A lot of ways things can go wrong. Well, again, most times things go, especially a brand new site, most times things will go pretty smoothly for you. But I can kind of see, having gone through many of these builds and deployments, I can kind of see why people do gravitate towards things like Squarespace and Wix, because it's all hosted there. There is no deployment. They're deploying for you. You just build the site and magically it's there. these are the things you have to worry about. And as Peter was saying earlier, and I think we did this even way back, we talked about building a site. It may seem strange to want to separate things because it makes this process a bit more complex. Like, for example, my domain, my DNS is not on my hosting company. I have that separate. I have Google G Suite for my email. I don't use my hosting email, and then I have my hosting thing. Well, why did it make my life more complicated? It gives me options and it doesn't tie me into one thing. And if one thing goes down, everything doesn't go down. So just like everything else in WordPress, there's flexibility in WordPress, but there's also, was a responsibility. There is a bit of complexity you get with that. So, any other
100%.
final thoughts or others? Any other things came up in the lessons learned from folks? We want to share stories of our worst deployments, things going wrong.
Well, I just went through this process with a client, and you covered pretty much everything that I ran into. So, good job.
Did it go well, Bob? Did you have any issues with yours? Or?
It got done. I mean, there's always a couple hiccups. It's like, oh shoot, yeah, I forgot about that thing or something. But yeah,
I'll admit, when I was doing this early on, I did not understand DNS settings very well. It was so foreign to everything else. And I think that was one that burned me a bit, where luckily I got through it and it wasn't like a super critical business site. It was just doing work for somebody else. But it took a little while to figure out. And that was the one that
yeah.
burned my fingertips.
And what I found very helpful too, I mean, just the LLMs are just so helpful. You get a question, how do I set this up? And they, like, for this specific host doing this, and it'll give you pretty good directions, like 90% of the time.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. The more specific you can get, the better, because it's really easy to get instructions that are for something else but sound exactly right because they are exactly right for this slightly different thing. So being specific is great. I was going to say similarly, looking for, and I say this often about like finding tutorials online, but making sure you know what they're teaching, which is it specific to your host? Are they using Cloudflare or the DNS from the registrar or whatever? Kind of know there's slight different flavors and paying attention to something.
I did sorry, real quick, just on the AI piece before we drop that.
Yeah.
I think, I found really good. I remember recently, I think it was a SiteGround one that I did where I was asking, I said, I gave it like we always say, and Peter, you do this quite well. It's give it the context. If I'm doing this with SiteGround and this and this, and the answers it gave me, it was like right to my problem, as opposed to if I went to SiteGround, I searched all the documentation to be like, where is it? So I think the more specific you give it the context, the more specific answer you'll get. Sorry, Sue, were you saying something?
Now, there's something I didn't hear you mention, but I didn't stay the whole time last time. We have a launch checklist, and the very last thing is, did you go look at the settings and uncheck that box that says, don't let search engines take a look at this site?
Yeah, I had, and that's in our.
Did you mention it?
Prior,
I can't tell you how many clients I talk to that are not ours that are calling us for help, and that box is still checked.
Yeah.
One thing along with that I don't always put on here, and I don't always do it, but I did for this site recently because it was such a drastic change. Is I had that step in there for prior where I ran Screaming Frog against the old site. I did that against the new site once I launched, because Screaming Frog will tell me, are there any, it's going through the sitemap and all that. Are there any broken links? Are there any error codes I don't expect? So that was just kind of a good sanity check again to rerun that and see if there's any issues. Thanks.
Yeah. Very good. I dropped a link into another plugin that I like. It's called Simple History.
I like that one too. Yeah.
It's a good one to just put on the site at the beginning, just to make sure that you see what's going on. It's very easy to see, including like checking for plugins, and especially if you're working with somebody else or you're handing it off to somebody and all, you can see who's gone in and done something in a very simple way. So while you might want to keep it forever, when you first launch something, it's just yet another thing that says what's going on, what's been happening, and it's Simple History is in fact a simple little plugin to do just that kind of Tell me
The other kind of ongoing one, I think I mentioned this in the checklist, was like the 404 errors. Like the one I just did. I mean, I had like 500 entries in my redirections, but there were still things that showed up in the 404 errors. It just over
Yeah.
time. And what I found some of those were the fact that this site was so old, there were some still HTTP references out someplace, or it was like media files that were no longer around, so like JPEG, like a JPEG from a page that was completely gone. So some of those, what I found over time, the site's been live now since March, I think. Some of those just flushed themselves out over time, and it wasn't. I knew it wasn't a person. It was just Google over time would be like, okay, that thing doesn't exist. So
Yeah.
I don't think it's possible to try to get 100% clean, no 404 errors. That's, what's the point? But you want to just make sure the numbers the trend is going downwards. And there were a couple I missed because, again, like I said, there were things that I wasn't even aware that people were still accessing. So whoops, or it wasn't the end of the world. I would just then on the fly, I'd see the 404 I'm using SEO Press. I can immediately create a redirection rule from that. So. But yeah, luckily.
Yeah, I'll give one quick thing about this, because it does, especially if you're doing a redesign of a site with the old stuff. One thing to do is understand to some level, like regex, right? So the idea of using variables in your redirects.
Yeah.
And then another thing is you make yourself a 404 page, page not found page that includes some language that says this site has recently been redesigned. Let us know. We'll keep tracking that. But like explain and be friendly about why the page is not found. It may be something that has changed. But I've had to do things where like a news section was so convoluted that basically I took anything that was like news and dropped it to the beginning of the news search for the news site without trying to do a one-for-one match, because it just became impossible. Not the best for SEO, but at least for users who might find something through a Google search when they get the link. If it couldn't find it, at least it could bring them to a place where they could find it quickly, which was, for me and for these size sites, much more important that we were helping the user than trying to solve any kind of specific SEO, need.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I think we covered it all. That's it. A lot of steps. Use that
Cover the
checklist.
infinite number of things that we have to.
It's that checklist at HartfordWP.com. Download it. Again, there's all other set of quirks of like we didn't talk to e-commerce or these other types. I mean, there's so many different types of WordPress sites, multi-site. That's a whole other set of other issues. But I think a lot of this was at least hopefully general enough for everybody. Yep. So again, hopefully, if you're doing something brand new, you don't have to worry about most of this. But otherwise, thanks, Bob. Otherwise, it's like these are hard learned lessons. So again, we appreciate everyone joining us tonight. And again, hopefully, maybe next month, maybe we'll have WordPress 7.0 to actually kick the tires. We'll see.
7.1.
7.2. All right. Well, have a good night, everyone. Hope to see you next month. Take care.
Thank you.
See ya. Bye.